Were you watching CNN and MSNBC this weekend? Well, they largely ignored President Trump's speech at CPAC, the liberal cable networks refusing to cut in for the former president's first speech since leaving office.
Here to react, senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, Patrice Onwuka. First off, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so it was the former president's first major speech since Biden took office. CNN had coverage of the pandemic. MSNBC aired a short clip of this speech. Fox obviously took it, from the get-go. Why do you think this is from each of those perspectives?
Well, it's not surprising. I think those other networks don't want to give too much energy to President Trump and his supporters. He certainly defined in his speech what Trumpism is and that the Republican Party is, frankly, his party at this point. But there's a lot of energy, and he laid out a roadmap for, what conservatives should be fighting against and fighting for, and holding President Biden accountable for all of the policies that he hid during the campaign trail and are now enacting that are really surprising Americans.
Patrice, this confused me for two reasons. One, those networks, CNN and MSNBC, made their bones over the course of the last couple of years by focusing 24/7 on Trump, albeit in a different way than, let's say, other networks may, a much more negative approach. But two, this was arguably the most newsworthy event of what seemed to be a fairly slow news day in a fairly slow news weekend. What's your response to all that?
Oh, it is surprising. I mean, certainly they made a ton of money on Trump. But right now, I guess the focus is there's nothing to see here, folks. Let's move along. Let's not give him too much energy or too much attention. And particularly if it's going to be attention that could be positive. And like I said before, attention that means him, highlighting how he is holding the Biden presidency accountable for all of the issues that they're enacting, and that these networks are glossing over and not covering. So, I think they're doing a little bit of cover-up for Biden and just trying to ensure that there's not a lot of attention driven to Trump.
Patrice, from Orlando to Boston Public Schools suspending enrollment for advanced learning classes for 1 year, as the superintendent there cites a lot of, quote, inequities discovered during the pandemic. Here are the numbers for you. We're going to pop them up on your screen. 70% of students enrolled in this gifted program were white and Asian. 80% of students in Boston Public Schools are Hispanic and black. Here is the quote from the superintendent. There's been a lot of inequities that have been brought to light in the pandemic that we have to address. There's a lot of work we have to do in the district to be anti-racist and have policies where all of our students have a fair shot at an equitable and excellent education. I mean, look, Patrice, I think there's an argument that those numbers need to include way more black and Hispanics just based upon the fact that blacks and Hispanics make up a larger part of the population. But why hurt the kids that have done well, that need that extra learning to push them, to advance them to the next level?
So this is an example of the soft bigotry of low expectations. I have a personal situation here or connection. I grew up in Boston, and I tested into some of those really unique programs for kids coming from poor neighborhoods, minority kids, because I did well and I had parents who were pushing me really hard. What this does is it takes those opportunities away from families like my own, of which there are many black and brown families. Instead of saying, okay, how can we get more of these kids? What are these families at 30%? What are they doing right? And how can we get more parents and families involved to be able to meet that bar? Instead, they're eliminating the bar entirely, getting rid of opportunities like this that enrich the lives of the educations of young people like myself who are growing up in a really tough situation, but we're trying to make it. And again, this is an example of the soft bigotry of low expectations. Our black kids, our brown kids can measure up. They need to be held accountable to a great standard, and they can do that. But this is not what elevates them.
And then 40 seconds, Patrice. The California Teachers Union president who led the school closure charge was seen dropping his daughter off at in-person preschool. Of course, we have that video. The daughter is blurred out, but now parent groups are saying this. They're yelling hypocrisy. What's your thoughts on this?
They're right to call out the hypocrisy. A lot of teachers, people in these teachers' unions, they do not send their children to the public schools of which they defend ardently, which tells you something about the quality of education that they claim they're defending, but they're not willing to support. And I will just say it's not just teachers' unions, folks. It's also people across the left, people in positions of power who rail against taking money away from public schools, rail against school choice, which is so important for minority kids, but they themselves, they have plenty of choice because they can send their kids to private schools.
Here's his statement in response. I have my 2-year-old in preschool. Unfortunately, there are not public schools for kids her age. We are excited that we will be reopening soon with the plan that our members and the district support. So there you have it. Patrice, as always, pleasure having you on. Thanks for your insight this morning.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.